Welcome, Kaya. It's really fabulous to have you here this afternoon, and appreciate the effort that you've all gone to in coming here in person as well as joining us from around the state online. It's my great pleasure today to introduce you to Sam Walsh, our keynote speaker. And Sam was really needs no introduction for some of his roles, but he was appointed to the Gold Corp board in January 2019, and I expect most of you in the room will be aware of some of the challenges that he inherited when he took on that role, the issues around gold sourcing as well as regulatory compliance, and they received enormous media, regulator, parliamentary and auditor scrutiny, most of it very public, and that was all shortly after he took on the role. So it's not quite the ride he was expecting, and he can share that with you, some of that story. But I have to say, from my perspective as Auditor General in auditing the Perth Mint and dealing with Sam as the board chair during that time, he handled it incredibly well. I was really grateful that he was in the chair, open, honest, just absolutely upfront about the issues and what he was dealing with. So from my perspective, to see the organisation come through it as strongly as it did is a testament to his leadership and that of the board. And I'm really pleased to say that they're in a very different position now. So we've got a success story behind us, but I'm going to let Sam share that with you. But in addition to the Gold Corp role, Sam is also chair of the Diocesan Trust, Theatre 180, the Royal Flying Doctor Service Western Operations, and he's a non-executive director of Mitsui & Co. Japan and the Anglican Community Fund. Sam also has, as you would know, an extensive senior exec background in industry, having been the CEO of Rio Tinto, and obviously senior leadership roles before that in the car industry, Nissan and MITS and General Motors Australia. He's received appointed Officer of the Order of Australia in 2010 for his distinguished service to the mining industry and the community. He was Western Australian Citizen of the Year for Industry and Commerce in 2007, and awarded the Order of the Rising Sun by the Emperor of Japan in 2021. So that's a unique one, Sam, and you can tell us about that in the break afterwards, I'm sure. But look, Sam's here today to share his valuable insights into the expectations of a board chair from the Audit Committee, as well as from the CEO's perspective and what he valued there. So he's going to draw on his rich experience from both private and public sectors and give a very comprehensive view of corporate governance and give us a really good view. So I'm really pleased to introduce Sam to you, and there'll be a short Q&A session afterwards, and then I'm going to give you an update on OAG things. But Sam, welcome to the Audit Committee Chair Forum.
Thank you very much, Auditor General, for inviting me to talk here today, and thank you for your very gracious comments. Thank goodness we did get the Mint out of the strife that it was in, because it was looking pretty troublesome at one stage. And thank you all for being here, and for those that are online. Now, I did a bit of a dress rehearsal with the slides earlier, and this one's fine, but you wait until we're 2 or 3 slides in. You'll need a magnifying glass to see them. But the audio team has told me that if you've got a problem in the back row, you just turn around and have a look at the slide that's behind you. And it's a little bit closer than the one at the front. Now, when I saw the list of who's here, I noticed that Mark Pusey is here. Well, Mark was a board member of the Perth Mint, or Gold Corp, but it was prior to all the shenanigans and all the issues. I think he left it for me to deal with. But Mark has volunteered to answer all the difficult questions at the end of the presentation. So I do hope that I can provide some useful insights to the Perth Mint from the board chair's point of view, and how the audit function supports its operations. Now, I'm sure that you all know something about the Perth Mint, even though it was when you were going to school that you went on a compulsory tour of the Mint. But in brief, we have been operating for 126 years. We're still manufacturing from the same premises down the east end of Hay Street, and essentially doing the same thing, refining gold and producing coins, which is the heart of what we do. But one thing that I've found in the 6.5 years I've been chair of Gold Corp, which is the corporate entity that operates the Perth Mint, is that it's a very much misunderstood organisation, even here in Western Australia. And that misunderstanding fed into some serious misrepresentation of the issues that became public with AUSTRAC anti-money laundering issues back in 2023. I'm sure that you read something about it in the media and heard the political discussion. So for the record, a quick snapshot, a few facts about the Perth Mint, just in case you get involved in the chase or some other quiz, you'll be able to answer the questions. Oh, and I've got to change the slide. Oh, no, you'll be able to read that one. Well, you'll be able to see the picture. Essentially, the Mint is an iconic of Western Australia. It is a great value-adding success story for our resource industry. We often hear commentators and others talk about the need for downstream processing rather than just shipping the ore off interstate or overseas. But the Perth Mint has been doing that quietly for more than a century and providing a massive support service for the state's gold mining industry. Well, in fact, the nation's gold mining industry, as we refine 80% of Australia's gold. Former CEO, I'm used to somebody else doing this. That's all right. Keep up. Gold miners send their ore directly to our refinery, which is near Perth Airport. It's sort of a secret, hidden location. You won't. There's no signs, so you'll never find it unless somebody actually gives you the address. And we pay on delivery, which is a massive boost to their cash flow. The gold is refined to the highest level of purity, then shipped as cast bars to investors around the world, and a percentage of our refined metal is reserved for coining operations, hence the Mint, which still operates from East Perth. And there we turn gold and silver into high-value minted products, including bullion and collector coins, which are some of the most sought after in the world. These heritage premises are also the home to our exhibition and gold tour and a retail shop where you can buy coins, luxury jewellery and gifts. We thought that 80,000 people visited the Mint, East Perth, each year. But that was because we counted the people that actually paid for a tour. We didn't count for the people who dropped in to sort of have a look at the shop and have a look at some of the exhibition. So we put a counter on the front gate. And in the first month, we had 25,000 people visit. So it's probably more like 250,000 people visit. A real tourism positive story. The other major pillar of our business is our depository service, where we buy and sell precious metals directly with investors and store it on their behalf in our secure vaults. And we currently have more than 10 billion of precious metals in storage on behalf of investors. Let me say that again. 10 billion. Not million, billion. That's a lot of money, a lot of gold. We're a government trading enterprise owned by the people of Western Australia, but we're nothing like the other GTEs. We're far more international in our outlook, with 90% of our products exported to more than 100 countries. We're the only GTE with $25 billion in revenue. Most of that's driven by the gold price. I'd like to take credit for it, but no, it's the uncertainty in the world that is actually fostering the dollar value. Our value add, if you want to measure it that way, is about 300 million. So that's our processing and manufacturing and what have you, not the 25 billion. And we're Western Australia's third largest exporter after Rio Tinto and BHP at 25 billion. It's probably not fully appreciated in Western Australia that the Perth Mint is ranked amongst the top mints in the world, with an outstanding reputation for the quality of our coins and the reliability of our refined product. And for this reason, Perth Mint gold products are in high demand from collectors and investors everywhere, and we trade huge volumes of precious metals. I covered that. There we go. So the importance of getting things right around risk and compliance can't be overstated. Now, I know that I'm speaking to an audience that understands everything about audit oversight. For those of us involved in an audit committee or the audit process, I know you've got your own war stories, but let me share some of mine. From my experience at Goldcorp and the compliance issues that we've grappled with and resolved. As Caroline said, my background is in the car industry and then the resources industry, initially at Rio Tinto, then Martin in Saudi Arabia as a non-executive director, and now on the board of Mitsui in Japan. Having run a mining company which had FIFO, fly in, fly out, I am now FIFO, travelling to Tokyo every 3 weeks. And my last visit to Japan last week was my 163rd visit to Japan. I don't think any of you can beat that. I didn't come to the resources sector from a technical angle. I'm an economist by training, not an engineer. I have a Bachelor of Commerce with an accountancy sub-major from the University of Melbourne. I've worked in the US with General Motors. I ran Nissan's operations in Melbourne and visited Japan many times, as I just said, and then with Rio Tinto in Australia and 3.5 years in the UK as CEO. Each jurisdiction operates with a different management style based on their cultural heritage, and my leadership style is an amalgam of all of them. A little bit of the American, well, get out of the way and let me get it done style, the Japanese approach of building consensus and empathy, and the more British reserved politeness. When I first became CEO of Rio Tinto, I was told that I was very brash and outspoken. Me? I don't think so. Of course, the Australian inventiveness and making things happen. So I brought that global experience when I joined the Gold Corporation board in January 2019. And I was asked by the Premier of the day to step in and improve governance and compliance. Only he didn't tell me what needed to be improved. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But first, a little bit about how things work at Goldcorp. As non-executive chair, like many of you, my role's part-time, not working inside the business, of course. I rely on the information provided to the board and the questions that I and the other directors ask. And the information can come from management board papers, importantly from Audit and Risk Committee, which is one of 3 Goldcorp board committees. Audit and Risk Committee's function is to provide the checks and balances and independent view of the health of the business in relation to issues such as, well, obviously the financial reporting, obviously the risk management, internal controls, internal and external audit, and compliance with various laws and internal policies. Our Audit Committee provides one view of that, but we also have other ways of assessing our health, of our governance and compliance progress, with internal and external audit, including audit by the Office of the Auditor General. In the case of our committee, it is audit and risk, so it offers that important independent view as to how you're managing your risks as well. Now, all of this sounds very straightforward to those of you that are familiar with it. However, in the case of the Mint, it's not as simple as it sounds. As I mentioned earlier, the Mint is a complex organisation and has complex compliance obligations. We're governed by the Gold Corporation Act, which has been our guiding legislation since the corporation was restructured in 1987. But, well, that's our export markets. It wasn't the slide I was hoping for. That's the one I'm looking for. At the latest count, there are 72 Acts of Parliament, state and federal, that apply to our operations. 72 pieces of legislation that we've got to comply with. In addition, there are 13 core standards that we must meet to continue to operate. And these cover our core functions, but more broadly apply to matters such as anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing, workplace health and safety, environment, responsible sourcing, measurements, second-hand dealers, state records, privacy, modern slavery. In addition, we must also comply with laws and regulations everywhere that we sell to. That complicates the issue given that we export to 108 nations. Overseas jurisdictions have their own requirements around a range of factors, including fraud protection, privacy, and many others which can catch you out if you're not aware of them. And it's up to us to be aware of them. The Audit Committee structure in Australia, and also in the US and UK, usually involves a member of the board chairing the Audit Committee. The Mint is very fortunate to have John O'Connor in the role as chair of our Audit Committee. He's a former head of Pricewaterhouse in Australia and comes with a great depth of knowledge in the field, and he has a remarkable attention to detail. We also have a breadth and depth of experience on the committee. It's extraordinary to have a person of the calibre of Richard Watson, the Assistant Under-Treasurer and Treasurer Representative, and Dean Nolder, who's a former Minister for Finance, and I'm grateful for their input. It's a simple structure that puts a lot of onus on the committee members to ensure that they're up to date with all compliance requirements. Now, this is a real contrast to the Japanese system, which I've seen up close for the last 8 years. As mentioned, I serve as a non-executive director on the board of Mitsui & Co. in Japan. We operate with an audit and supervisory board, something which is the norm in the Japanese corporate world. The Audit and Supervisory Board consists of 5 directors, not 1, and 5 staff who work with external accounting firms to conduct audits and visit the 68 countries where Mitsui operates. These directors spend 100% of their time on audit. That's all they do. They're not involved in decisions about approval of projects. They're there to hear about it, but they don't vote for it. They're just there watching and observing. It's like a third party sitting in board meetings assessing the performance of directors. Are the directors asking the right questions? Are they contributing? Is anyone hiding in a corner? It's a very disciplined process, but truly a healthy system of checks and balances ensures that the board is actively engaged and involved. But it's a different process for a different culture, and it probably wouldn't work here even if you tried to impose it. Not to say that the Japanese system is better than ours, but I've been on the Mitsui board for 8 years, and through that process, I think I've been able to bring some corporate rigour from my experiences elsewhere to the table there. For example, the Mitsui board initially never talked about health and safety. I mean, that would be unbelievable to us. I insisted that we had to, and that Mitsui needed to adopt the same high standards across the board in the 68 countries where we operate, whether it's in Japan or for projects in Africa or Brazil. Now, half amusingly, the same thing applies to the way we apply disciplinary action. When I was first there was a case of fraud, and I asked what had happened, and they told me, and then I said, and what have you done to stop it ever happening again? And they told me. And I said, and what was the disciplinary action? They sort of looked at me sort of quizzically. Well, we sent the person a stern letter. I said, you can't. I said, if that's the only penalty, and we've got operations in Bangladesh and Pakistan and heaven knows where, I mean, if that's the only outcome, then we'll all be stealing from the company. You've got to so typically Japanese, now whenever there's a suspect transaction, a fraud, they send me an email. Dear Walsh-son, we're sad to report there's been another case of fraud. And this is what we propose. We are firing people. We are reporting it to the police, as they should have. And I've worked hard to help Mitsui westernise their processes and policies and apply consistency in the way the standards are applied. Now, of course, audit focus will differ between organisations and depending on what business that they're in. For example, I'll just give you some paper. For example, at Rio Tinto, I'll just throw away the page I was going to read. At Rio Tinto, in addition to financial audit, it was seen as vital that safety stats and data was audited and checked for accuracy. Why? Because the incentive scheme included health and safety as measures. And so we need to make sure that no one was gilding the lily and reporting honestly. Obviously, they do need to ensure that, and I'm sure that now greenhouse data, for example, is also reviewed by audit with the same diligence as an important part of protecting brand credibility and avoiding misrepresentation claims. In my role as chair of the Perth Diocesan Trust, the legal entity and commercial arm of the Anglican Church, child sex abuse claim provisions are part of the audit remit. And you say, well, why on earth? Well, it's to ensure that the trust can actually finance claims, and it's clearly a critical part of the operations. I'm also chair of the Royal Flying Doctor Service. And Joanne Farrell, thank you for being here. Joanne is one of my directors, where clinical governance is a major focus, and a national audit process reviews this to ensure the excellence in healthcare that we aspire to is actually being delivered. RFDS has 22 aircraft to rescue and retrieve 10,000 people a year, so they need to know how that's tracking and how they're meeting expectations and the contractual obligations with the state and federal government. So back to the Mint, which has its own areas of speciality which are monitored by our audit and risk function. As a significant provider of precious metals and related services, with billions of dollars of transactions each year, we must ask ourselves how well we understand our customers and what's happening with each transaction we undertake. As I mentioned earlier, Mr McGowan, Premier at the time, asked me to join the board to help to fix up a few things. Well, it wasn't on my radar at the time. There were deficiencies in the way that the Mint was managing its AML-CTF obligations. But at the time, there were more pressing issues that I picked up on immediately. I think it's fair to say, and the Auditor General was very gracious in her comments, when I came on board, there was an adversarial relationship between the Mint and the Office of the Auditor General. The view from the Mint side of the fence, not mine, theirs, was that the OAG had no business looking at what we were doing, despite the fact the OAG was representing our owner, the government. Anyway, we fixed that. They were a GTE, but they took a very independent approach to their activities. So my first year as chair did involve fence building with the OAG, and I believe we developed a constructive and positive relationship. The Auditor General has helped and supported us during our efforts to remediate the business, and I thank her very much for that. During the Senate inquiry into the Mint's AUSTRAC compliance in particular, she made it clear in evidence to the hearing she didn't believe that there'd be a penalty from AUSTRAC. Nothing like the $1 billion fine that was being tossed around in political and media circles and at the inquiry itself. And, of course, she was proved correct. It's been a huge turnaround from where our relationship was. However, in 2019, we had work to do. As I mentioned at that time, anti-money laundering shortcomings were not on the radar. Of course, the board was aware of the need to comply with AML laws and regulations. And we'd already seen AUSTRAC take action against Crown casinos and the banks over failures in this area. But from the Gold Corporation board view, AUSTRAC had reviewed our compliance in 2010 and again in 2014 with no substantive findings. So although I was brought into Gold Corp as chair to tidy up governance issues, there were at the time no red flags on AML CDF. They were not picked up until I found in an external audit, and we self-reported it to Austrac in 2020. I personally believe that Austrac sharpened their focus on AML compliance after those audits that I mentioned, 2010 and 2014. And it could be argued that internal and external audits should have detected any shortcomings in our operations, but AML was not given the same laser focus of attention there as it is now. It's not an excuse for us. It's not an excuse for you. We should have complied. But it's an example for you of a shortcoming in audit that had huge ramifications. There were, of course, other compliance issues, such as conflicts of interest at the board level, management incentives, IS&T and cybersecurity, the London Bureau of Metals compliance, health and safety, environmental performance, and so on. And these were being addressed. And my role was to expedite this process, and as part of it, there was a refresh of senior management, and as it turns out, the board as well. Cultural change is difficult and a time-consuming process. Doesn't mean that anyone is guilty of deliberate misdemeanour or is to blame for shortcomings, but we needed a refresh to ensure that we had the right skills to deliver what was expected of us. In terms of the Mint's compliance with AML laws, when we realised we're not compliant on several measures, we decided immediately to overhaul our systems and processes to ensure that we could meet our obligations. Part of that was to go back to square one, our decision, to go back to square one and refresh the customer data for more than 70,000 customer records that we held. Some of them hadn't been refreshed for a number of years. There were account details, some of them were paper records, but there was no centralised system to keep track of them. So we set aside $34 million to fix it. Now, for a business making a $50 million profit in a good year, this was a huge commitment. It was a commitment that the government supported. So we had the imprimatur to proceed. We had set up a team of 50 specialists working on the project, contacting every one of those customers and uploading their records, or those who no longer wished to do business with us were removed from our account database. The customer update was just one element of the AML upgrade. We now have a centralised customer operations team. We have different areas in the organisation selling to different people and selling different products to people. And this group, centralised group, is dedicated to signing up new customers in all of our business units to ensure we know everything we need to know about them and their activity with us. Well, we've been through a significant uplift of our IT systems to ensure they're able to keep track of our customers across the different strands of our business. Now, we committed to delivering all of these changes by the end of last month, April 2025. As part of the enforceable undertaking, we agreed with Austrac in 2023. And I'm pleased to say that we've delivered on that commitment, and we're now waiting on the final sign-off from our independent auditor and then from Austrac to confirm that we've delivered as promised. And I can confirm that at no point during this extensive AML remediation process or the external audits has there been any evidence uncovered of illegal behaviour or criminal activity by any of our customers. Certainly we have some customers who have metal on deposit with us who've refused to comply with our Know Your Customer requests, despite this being required by law. People who are worried about identity theft and people sort of taking their place. They said, we're not going to provide you that data. And our response is, well, it's actually required by law and we'll have to freeze your gold until you actually provide the data as required by law. We've got a few customers that are in that position. This uplift was work that we had to do, but I want to emphasise that we weren't dragged kicking and screaming to do it. Back in 2020, we understood the need to act, and we had plans in train before AUSTRAC got involved. I know that mistakes were made and processes had to be brought in line with current expectations. But many of the claims against us were blown way out of proportion by party politics and the media once the Four Corners program went to air in March 2023. There were scurrilous reports that the Mint was doping gold shipped to China, and we were at risk of having to accept the return of tons of gold because of purity problems, and the Western Australians were on the hook. You were all on the hook for $9 billion worth of gold. Simply not true. It was nonsense. The claim didn't stand up for scrutiny, but that didn't stop it being repeated time and time and time again. In reality, the Chinese customers ordered 99.99% gold, as pure as you can get, and they received 99.99% gold. There was never a question about gold purity of our bars at any time. There was a customer complaint from one customer about the silver content in the remaining 0.01% non-gold component. Basically, there was too much silver in that component. But they didn't pay for the silver, they paid for the gold. And that complaint came to light and was promptly resolved to the satisfaction of all parties. It became public 2 years later, in what can only be seen as an attempt to discredit the Mint for whatever reasons. Also, as I mentioned, the media was claiming that we're facing a multi-billion-dollar fine from AUSTRAC for the AML breaches. In fact, AUSTRAC understood the nature of our shortcomings and the action that we'd committed and were already implementing to rectify the problem. As I said, there was no fine. And in November 2023, we accepted an enforceable undertaking with AUSTRAC that formally committed us to work that was already underway. Politics intervened in the process. I'm telling you all this so that you understand, if you step off into the deep end, watch out. Politics intervened in the process in the form of a Senate inquiry. We cooperated with an inquiry to the fullest extent, and I, along with the former CEO and the chair of the Audit Committee, attended 2 public hearings to give evidence and responded to 180 questions on notice from the senators. 180 questions. Unbelievable. As we expected, there were no new insights from these hearings, which included inquiry conducting an extensive process of questioning representatives of AUSTRAC and other government entities. Now, in addition, at that time, I had to stabilise the board and the employees during a Western Australia Treasury analysis considering whether the Mint should remain in public ownership, which predictably concluded that it was in the public interest for the government to retain the Mint in public hands. But just imagine if your GDE was suddenly put on the sales, list. Just imagine dealing with your 700 employees, your board, your senior management, reassuring them, don't worry, everything's going to be all right, you'll be fine, knowing that the senior management would be the first people who'd be fired if somebody took it over, a competitor, dare I say. So it wasn't sold, but we went through a lot of angst. And part of that angst came from the fact that there was uncertainty in government as to how a GTE was actually operating. And the feeling was, well, it's better to get rid of it, then we don't have to sort of worry about it, and it could be passed on to somebody else. But I consider the outcome a strong vote of confidence for the work that we are undertaking to uplift our systems and processes and ensure that the Mint is in the right shape to tackle the future challenges. And this was substantiated just last week by the Office of the Auditor General returning Gold Corporation to its best practice list of the top 20 government entities according to their financial controls and reporting processes. It's a strong endorsement of our sharp focus on governance and getting the fundamentals right. However, there were a lot of expensive and time-consuming lessons that had to be learned from our experiences over the last couple of years. My simple message to you is don't let it happen to you. How to avoid it is a question, but from my point of view of the Audit Committee, it's all about the committee being proactive, being informed, and being willing to do what's required to ensure your business is meeting its compliance obligations. And make sure you fully understand the extent of those legal and legislative obligations. As the Mint experience showed, it's not a simple undertaking. The onus is on the business to make sure that you're doing the right thing. No one's going to do it for you. And of course, the buck stops with directors. And in serious cases, penalties for non-compliance can be severe. At Goldcorp, we've overhauled our board processes. We conducted an independent expert governance review of the board, what information we receive, how we handle it, how we issue items for discussion and noting, what needed discussion and what didn't. The review, however, did not raise any red flags, as we'd already tightened our operations. And the Four Corners episode in 2023 showed us that people can be malicious with information. Some of the allegations aired clearly involved information that came from inside the organisation, even if the claims were unfounded. So audit chairs need to be aware of the potential for this to happen, because there are sometimes going to be disgruntled people with an axe to grind. We can argue after the event that any claims being aired are false, but once they're out there, the mud sticks, let me assure you, and it's extremely hard to correct a record. Boards need to be conscious of what's happening in the business. Their information largely comes from senior executives, so directors need to be aware that if there are cultural issues within an organisation, the right information may not always be transmitted to board level. When I joined the Mint, it was apparent there were internal cultural problems. We didn't hear about them directly from the CEO, but it became obvious that in some ways the culture was trapped in 1899, back when the Mint was first started. It was a centralised command and control system. Everything came from the CEO. These days, that management style is doomed to fail, and people won't accept it. A successful business looks to everybody in the operation for input. You need buy-in from your staff, and you need to take them on the journey with you. And obviously decisions have to be made by leaders, and you can't expect one person to know it all. As board chair, I accept some clear insights from the Audit Committee as to how to improve the business. We should be open to learning from the external audit process. People sometimes see audit as a cop on the beat. Who's there to stop you doing naughty things? But these are audit specialists who work in a variety of businesses. They get to see best practice and what's working well elsewhere. So there's much to be learned from them. And anything that we can learn and adapt to help us to improve the business, avoid big mistakes, has to be embraced. I'm very pleased that the board stood behind management throughout the process that I've just described, and the board stuck together and were committed to working through the issues. It made our experience much easier to know that we're all focused on the same outcome, to resolve these issues and to ensure that they never happened again. The signal from the independent auditor, now this is an independent auditor who's appointed by AUSTRAC, and we had them come in and work with our team that was working on remediation. So we're totally transparent with them. They could see everything we're doing, how we were doing it, who the people were and what have you. And they have indicated that we're on track with our processes and we should keep doing what we're doing. I look forward to hearing the same conclusion from AUSTRAC. The independent auditors are due to report to AUSTRAC mid-May. I don't know when AUSTRAC will complete their recommendations. I expect it'll be a couple of months from there. We run the risk that media will sort of pick up on that and make a big meal of it. But we've been adamant with the media that we've done what we need to do and we've done it properly. And from our point of view, the issues and challenges are now on the table, and hopefully we can enjoy the time ahead. As directors, we'll support management in their efforts to invest and add value to the business instead of focusing on the firefighting that they have over the last couple of years. Of course, we don't step back from our compliance obligations, but we can look forward with some confidence. So thank you all again for being here today to hear my observations. Especially I'd like to thank you, Auditor General, and I want to acknowledge again your support and help and understanding through the process. She worked very closely with us to ensure that we crossed the T's and dotted the I's and got the processes right. And thank goodness we did. And all of that's been much appreciated by me and everyone at the Mint. Thank you.
We are fortunate that we have some time for questions with Sam. Who you can hear has clearly been through the ringer on this, and I'm very pleased that you're still standing as a result. At the end of it, a testament to your perseverant character and that of the board. I guess my observation is that Perth Mint was an entity that actively resisted routine scrutiny, and so my observation with that sort of mindset and that sort of situation is that when it catches up with you, it's always more than a deluge. And in this case, it's something of a biblical flood. And so now you've looked under every rock. We've looked under every rock. We think we have an assessment of the scale of the problems and their resolution and where things are at the moment. So well done. Well done to you. Open to some questions. Maria has a microphone. And I think online, Tash as well, questions can come through to Brenda online.
Hi. Thank you so much. That was so interesting and a warning for us all. Actually, culture comes up a lot as being so important to the healthy function of a corporation. But how do you assess, how do you measure culture when you only know what you are told, you only see what you're shown? What are some other red flags that you've come to sense something's wrong without having a full picture of culture? Caroline just mentioned avoiding scrutiny, but is there anything else where you start to think, something's a bit funny here?
Well, I mean, the avoiding scrutiny was extraordinary, and it sort of related to the CEO at the time believing that he was not accountable to anybody. Of course, the CEO is accountable to the board, accountable to the minister, accountable to the owners, the people of Western Australia, and the Auditor General who represents all of those. How do you tell about the culture? Well, you go walkabout. Clearly you have to visit the operations to understand the processes and ensure health and safety and environment and where investment's required and so on. But you also get to talk to people. And we understood very early in the piece that people were fearful of bringing things through to the board unless the CEO had sanctioned it. That CEO retired, and I had the job of bringing in the next CEO with a committee of directors who were assisting me. We didn't go for an expert in terms of refining gold or stamping coins or whatever. We deliberately brought in somebody, it was Jason Waters from Synergy. We brought in Jason because he's a people person, he's a leader, and we knew that we needed to go through a cultural reinvention. Jason got stolen by his former chair of Synergy, and he went off to the Perth airport. We've brought in another CEO, Paul Graham, and he again is a people person. I don't think there's anybody in Perth who really understands the refining and minting process, except the people at the Mint now. There's no other businesses that do work like that. So you're not going to bring in a technical expert, but we could bring in a cultural and people expert, and that's what we've done. And it's working out really, really well. Thank you for your question. Another question.
Thank you, Sam, sorry. That was very interesting hearing your perspective on the organisation's experience. I guess I'm interested in your view around the regulatory environment. I think you said there are 72 pieces of legislation, which is obviously in place to bring about good compliance, ethical behaviour, acting with integrity. How would you say that compares with the journey that the board took the organisation on? So your own motivation, what you brought to the table, and how effective would you say, you know, externally driven versus internally driven motivation for change?
I mean, I think everybody wants to do the right thing. Everybody, you know, wants to be a good organisation, something that our employees can be proud of, something that people want to belong to, an organisation that people want to do business with. So no problem at all with sort of being a good corporate citizen. Personally, I expect that some of the legislation is a fix-all. It's been brought in to resolve this issue or that issue, and it may or may not be required. It's like when you hop on an aircraft and they go through all the safety briefing and they don't tell you why they have to go through all these things and why there are all these rules and what have you. Some of them you can understand. You know, don't blow up your life vest until you leave the plane, or else you have trouble getting off the plane. That's fairly self-explanatory. Keeping your shoes on. They don't exactly explain why you've got to keep your shoes on until the plane's taken off. The reason they don't tell you is they don't want to scare hell out of you, because if there's some issue, all the glass and what have you will fall down. It'll be on the path where you're trying to walk in your bare feet or your sock feet. But each of those sort of rules and what have you have been brought in because of an incident, and hopefully they're there to keep us safe. Same with the legislation. They've all been instituted as fix-alls for things that have happened, and they may not apply directly to your organisation, but they may. The fascinating thing to me is the health and safety, workplace health and safety legislation, which applies to all of us. And sort of hidden in that legislation when it first came out is psychosocial safety. And all of us can feel, oh, well, of course, we're a sensible organisation that meets those expectations. Well, I'm on 3 boards, and in each of those boards, there's somebody's opened the whole cupboard, and all these things have tumbled out, all these issues that we had no line of sight on, that we're now having to work through. Some of those issues are very, very real and have to be managed. Some of them are a little bit imaginary, but psychosocial health is now well and truly on our agenda, and it's a critical issue for us to work through. Can you imagine me in Japan, in Marunouchi, explaining to the Mitsui board about psychosocial health and telling them that, hey, you think that the corporate veil will protect you, but the corporate veil no longer exists. And as directors of Mitsui, you are accountable for psychosocial health. So you better, or safety, so you better learn all about it and learn how to deal with it. A fascinating sort of journey for me and for them. Thank you.
Hi, Sam. Very insightful. And,
thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm just interested in your views, not around the Mint, but for non-executive directors. And I think we've all come from management in some shape or form. 2 or 3 tips from you in terms of the transition from the management role to the non-exec role?
Well, firstly, you're non-exec, you're not management, and you've got to step back from managing the detail and whatever. Your value is adding insight from 30,000 feet for the entire business. The second advice that I'd give you is to be very, very careful of which board you actually join. These days, with the 72 pieces of legislation, you can be on the hook very easily if an organisation doesn't have the systems and processes and procedures in place, because the board is accountable. But importantly, you've got to get to know your business. As I mentioned, sort of management by walking around, sort of understanding what's critical in the business and what's not, and keeping track. In most of my board roles, I'm actually chair, so I can make sure that those sorts of things are put in place and they're right. I've been asked to join a number of junior miner companies, and I said no. Why did I say no? A, because I know they don't have the systems that I would be used to at an organisation like Rio Tinto. B, I run the risk if I join a junior board that everyone will rush in and buy shares thinking Sam has done his homework so intensively, this is a good place to be. And that may or may not be true. As well as that, mining companies they're cyclical, so they go up and they go down. But yeah, you've got to be very, very careful that you walk that fine line between keeping in touch with what's going on in the business versus actually running the business. How are we going for time?
I think one more question.
No.
But
Good.
if there isn't, that's fabulous, because we are a little over already, Sam. Please join me in thanking Sam Walsh for those insights. I guess in terms of being care in which board you joined, Sam, the former Premier probably didn't tell you about the governance improvements required specifically, because I hadn't briefed him on certainly what we were concerned about at that point, and who could have predicted what else came out of the woodwork. But just that question around red flags, I recall my first meeting with the then CEO, and it's not appropriate to go into details there, but things that I would say around dismissiveness of risks. If people are dismissive of the risks you raise and your questions around how they're being managed, that's a massive red flag. If they're defensive when issues are raised, that's another red flag. Can I just say to those in the room that if I invite you in for a meet and greet or a meeting on a specific matter one-on-one, do not bring your CEO or CFO. I usually have something to say. It's a rare occurrence, and I have something important to tell you. As you're talking about the vault of the $7 billion, and this sort of goes back to red flags, I remember being offered a tour of Perth Mint's shiny stuff, and I felt like it was sweet talking me. And so I refused for the first few years, knowing that my audit teams were in there multiple times a year. And when I did say yes in the middle of COVID, when they were pushing us out saying, we may not be able to do stock takes, I thought, well, it's been a long time since I was on stock take. I'm doing one this year and it's going to be Perth Mint, because I need to be able to look in when the scrutiny question came up. I need to be able to look people in the eye, whether it be the Premier, the Minister, and anyone else who's asking questions, the regulator at that point. I need to be able to look them in the eye and say, I've sighted that gold, I've sighted that silver. Never before have I seen so much precious metal, never before I've seen so much silver. And I became such an expert checking the stock on the shelves or on the pallets to stock sheets and vice versa, that when I was watching Vladimir Zelensky's sitcom Servant of the People, which if you haven't watched it, it's fascinating, particularly in light of events in Eastern Europe. But I became such an expert on what real gold looks like that when there was the scene in the vault there on the TV, I went, that's not real gold. And that was the plot scene, but the plot of that scene. Anyway, look, lots of insights there, and I really am pleased that the organisation has come through it, because as you say, it is really important for WA. It does some great stuff. It's one of our national mining assets owned by the people of Western Australia. And like all these things, it's never all good or all bad. It's a mixed bag. You can't demonise organisations or people because they're never all good or all bad. And so there needs to be a recognition of what needs to be in place and what the relative strengths and weaknesses are, and that willingness to address those. On to more mundane, routine stuff that hopefully is the main of what you deal with rather than the stuff we've been talking about. I just want to touch on, in the time we have available, 5 main things really arising from our most recent audit cycle that's relevant to both the state and local government sectors. I'm going to skip through a couple of reports. The Financial Audit Results Report. I'm going to highlight some key messages and acquaint you with our reports, the General Computer Controls Results Reports, what our focus is for the upcoming 2025 financial audit cycle, some of the key things. And then I'm going to talk to you about a specific case study that I think is where we'll get the most value from the time we have. It's the Assist Child Protection Case Management System. Some of you may have seen some of the public reporting on this when we tabled the report a couple of months ago, but there were such serious flaws in that system, that IT system, that looks after some of the most vulnerable people in our state. But as you'll hear, it's not just the 5,000 children in care. There are some very useful lessons there. I also want to tell you about an interesting webinar that we have coming up, or that really an invitation for, and something I'm participating in that you may be interested in. So, the number of audit qualifications is going down. As I said, I'm going to skip through the graphics. You've seen this in previous years. The report is, you have access to it. Tash, if all the people here are not subscribed to being notified with our recent reports, am I able to add you to our list? I've just met with a mayor who wants to have all mayors, shire presidents as well as the CEOs receive our reports, Tash, because they find them very useful around resources and recognise there may be a gap there. But look, the number of qualifications, it's still too high, but you'll see the downward trend. Let's keep it going. That reduces everyone's headaches and potentially audit costs, which we'll all be happy about. But there are still entities out there receiving 3 or more qualifications on their financial audits in the state sector around controls, and that exposes entities to risk of error or fraud. This is just really a measure of both sort of error in the financial statements, but also audit value. You can see that the audit errors are reducing. We've only been tracking this for the last few years under Grant Robinson's leadership of the Financial Audit Division. You can see the errors in recent years come down from 2.7 billion down to 2 billion. A few more numbers. The local government sector actually has a much bigger decline in number of errors and value. But it's an indication of the entity's robustness in financial processes. So we like seeing those come down. There's some graphs in there showing you where the management findings are, what's significant, what's prior year persistent, but these are the things I want to talk to you about. Valuations. Some of you may have heard the public reporting and media attention on our report released last week, and we have more to say about that in coming weeks for a different audit. But look, land asset transfers between state entities, we were concerned about a practice we saw in a number of significant transactions this year where the value was written down before being transferred to another state entity for sale. So, for example, Bentley 360, $53 million in Housing Authority, written down to $2.5 million before being transferred to Development WA for its development. It may be that that development doesn't end up making a financial return for the state, but what it does is it increases the risk of fraud, corruption or misconduct. It gives the appearance of those land developments being more profitable than they really are, which means that decision makers, when being recommended by management to sell land to a third party, non-state ownership, non-public ownership, means that they may let it go for less than it's worth. And I've been advocating for the good old-fashioned public auction or public advertising process of these lands, and we'll keep doing so because you need that transaction accountability, maximising public value from land assets as well as value visibility. So our recommendation relevant to audit committees is that land is transferred at the carrying value. Sustainability reporting. Still not happening in the state for state or local government. And look, the bottom line is proceed with caution, learn from others. It's going to be expensive. The systems that need to be in place for data collection and monitoring and reporting to get to an auditable quality are certainly not there yet. And so nothing really to report, just letting you know we haven't changed our view that we are not advocating for wholesale implementation and auditing of this, because no one's ready. The entities aren't ready. As an office, we're not ready. We can't find the people or the skills. And I think I've said this before loudly and clearly enough, but I'll say it again. If you think financial audits are expensive, you ain't seen nothing yet. This is a whole new framework without practice or precedent in Australia, and we've gone the whole hog at a corporate reporting level. Machinery of government changes. So some of you will be affected by that on state sector departmental audit committees as well as subsidiaries. 9 departments are affected. There's going to be complete or partial transfer of assets and services. 16 are not affected. We're going to get 1 new department. For the budget process, the agencies are being requested, and this is sort of live and current, and this week's task for your finance teams, being requested to backcast their financial and performance information to make prior year information comparable. And look, KPIs, I think there's no backcasting because of that short time frame. I'm really pleased that it's a 1 July implementation, but that is clearly not, it's not very far away. And there's a sort of practical implementation expected by 1 January. This is still really tight. But what I'm saying is that this financial year that we're currently in, ending on 30 June, is a normal financial year, and we expect those control weaknesses and everything to keep coming down, and it would be lovely to get 1 year that is not affected by these things where we see some real improvements. But look, it is going to definitely affect finance, HR, IT functions. And look, there's always a demand in these changes, in MOG changes or public sector reform as it's being called. It's a large investment of effort and attention by key personnel who are already busy and fully scheduled on other things, so it will be a diversion. And as the 2017 MOG changes demonstrated, there's a need to proceed with an awareness of the costs of initial implementation. There is a cost to MOG because delayed system amalgamation and then the use of consultants, they can prove to be an expensive approach and leave a legacy of concerning control gaps. That's in my AG overview of last week's financial audit results report. And we've made other observations on the sort of 2017 MOG over the years in these results reports. State government, look, really, I won't touch on the general computer controls, but I want to just skip through the slides so you know what graphics are in there, and I'll just tell you briefly what's on there. But the main message is there's still much work to be done on information system controls in both state and local government. And as I said, better use of our time is to talk about the child protection case. But look, long-standing cybersecurity weaknesses in the state, 67% of significant findings have been carried over from the prior year. In local government, it's about half, and we wonder if that's because of the public reporting of significant findings. That might be a factor that local governments, unlike state governments, have to publicly disclose the significant audit findings and have a remediation plan. So we obviously encourage entities to act promptly. The dark characteristics, they're the 10 things we assess against. You might need your glasses or to turn around, as Sam suggested. But look, 80% of the control weaknesses, pretty much in state and local government, related to information and cyber security. Particular concern is access management. Who has access to your systems? Is it privileged? Is it being cut off when they leave? And endpoint security around devices and those sorts of things. And I've got Paul Tilbrook, who's acting head of information systems audit here, nodding, and he's available in the when we're having refreshments to ask specific questions. Cameron is on well-earned leave, who many of you know. But feel free to ask Paul some questions in the break. Capability maturity assessments. This is in there. The dots represent an entity along the 10 things we assess against. So all this data is in there if you want comparability. This is the local government results report. Shows you when we finalise the audits. The one on the right was where our timeliness of completion was. The light blue one, we've improved the timeliness of completion with the local government entities. So it's a really good joint effort to get the audits wrapped up on time. Again, the audit errors, you can see that's much lower than state, down to $500 million from 1.6. And this is the one they're all getting excited about, and for good reason. And I actually had a beautiful complaint letter when an entity didn't get into the top 20 and they had been. But I really valued that because it was encouraging to me. It showed you how much they value it, how much they are energised, and it really was a competitive process for local government to get in there. So there were quite a few that just missed out. Again, these reports are produced every year for state and local government. This is where the meat is. This is a diagram, and often our IS audit diagrams, if you're sitting on an audit committee and we are auditing one of your, what we call apps as part of our app reviews, sometimes the best understanding you can get of your systems is when we put it in writing in a graphic like this. Maria, our graphic designer up the back, is highly talented and works closely with the audit teams to create meaning. But basically, we said this system was not fit for purpose. And it puts the privacy and safety of vulnerable children at risk, which is a pretty significant finding. So they don't effectively manage, the Department of Communities doesn't effectively manage the confidentiality, integrity and availability of the system and the important information it holds. The system is used by over 2.5, these numbers I hope will make your hair stand on end, 2,500 staff across 37 locations. It allows them to assess, investigate and monitor children at risk and provide support to families. It holds current and historic personally identifiable information of over 180,000 children and 218,000 family groups and 38,000 carers. It contains incredibly sensitive information such as child abuse reports, including victims, witnesses and alleged perpetrators, and the details. In the last year, Communities received over 61,000 reports of concern and performed around 15,000 child safety investigations. All of that information is stored in Assist. The red dots show where the failures are in the system that we looked at. And these were the key findings. So almost all the over 2,500 staff can view or modify all information in Assist. Staff access is not restricted to only those cases they're assigned to. We found that sensitive documents, because of the system limitations around being able to staff in teams, being able to work together on the same case, we found that sensitive documents, reports, investigations were shared across and stored across staff computers and network drives. They shared these documents, staff shared these documents internally using email. That's because the system doesn't have that functionality to collaborate. So this is not a criticism of the staff as such, the caseworkers, the social workers that are trying to look after and respond to a huge number of allegations, reports, cases, and care for a lot of children. They're trying to do their best with a system that has serious limitations. Having said that, the system does actually have logging of access and data changes. But the department doesn't actually have a full understanding of the capability, so therefore hasn't turned it on. And this isn't theoretical. The access issue is not theoretical. There have been cases in other jurisdictions that have been made public around this, around people accessing information in not-for-profits. They've left that. They've still got access to the system. They're contacting kids to groom them. Yep. So there's all the other issues around duplicate records that came when the system was first implemented in 2010. And, you know, if there's duplicate records, you may not have all the information to make a decision around keeping a kid safe. You've also, when we talk about all the information around, say, witnesses and things, if you make a report because you're concerned about something that you witness. You obviously, if they're your next door neighbour or, former violent partner or something, you want the confidentiality of that information, of that report, to be assured. And at the moment it isn't. And so not being able to find information or finding duplicate information, it's kind of a mess. And there's business case, it's funding being provided by government for communities to do a business case to scope this. But the lessons here around any IT system that holds valuable information, being able to go in and have a look at who has access to it, how access is being monitored and how changes are being monitored, and understand what the risks really are with that is really, really important. And there's many more findings there in the report. If you are looking at an IT system, if you're scoping an IT audit of an important system, have a look at the criteria and the findings for this audit, because it will give you a good idea on what you need to get your internal auditors or consultants to look at. I'm going to leave it there with my bit, open for questions now, either of me or if you've thought of something else for Sam. Maria again has the microphone. And just let us know where you're from, what your perspective is, and your name, so that we can catch up as well afterwards in the break.
Sure. Paul Larson from the Kimberley Ports Authority. Just with the assist case, thank you for sharing that. But is that system a off-the-shelf system, a system built internally, or a combination of both, or something else?
I've got Paul here who's going to come up and answer the specific details of that system for you, Paul.
The system is a combination of both. It's a off-the-shelf customer relationship management system that has been heavily customised by the department to try and suit its needs. Yep.
And we all know that off-the-shelf is preferred, don't we? But it's where the customisation comes in, that you can get risks and people who don't know what the features are that can be put around that. Any other questions?
Alan Piper, I'm Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee at Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industry.
We know you, Alan, because you gave such a great presentation last time. And those who missed it, do we still have a recording?
That's drifted into history. An observation, and I'm sure you picked it up in the report, but when you've got an open system like that, and for example, violent people subject to restraining orders wanting to track a partner, and you've got 2,000 entry points, and you're doing a business case to get it fixed in 3 years, that sends shivers deeply down my spine.
All we can do is put in our reports publicly around what the situation is, what the timeframe committed to by the department, and if the community or the parliament think that's not quite an urgent enough response.
Someone could die. Having lived in a previous life.
You've got your previous justice hat on, don't you?
I've got my previous justice hat on.
Yeah, it's concerning.
That scares the living daylights out of me, to be honest.
Yep.
So they've actually committed to take a review of who has access and update their access management. Sorry. As one of our recommendations was that while they were waiting for the update to occur in 2028, that they review how they allow staff to access the system. So they've committed to do that review in the interim and change that open access.
As long as they go roll back. And while I've got the mic, excuse, the comments around legal framework, Sam, you're lucky you only got 70. I think for most of the major departments, I know when we were at Justice, we added them up and we had something just under 250, and they were directly accountable as opposed to omnibus legislation. So that whole business of understanding legislation in depth, particularly stuff that's been on the shelf that's got hooks in it, where people take it for granted, and as the world changes, there are things sitting in the background. So I think in my view, that whole issue of, if you like, review of legislative risk not that the legislation's a risk, but your compliance with it is a well-made point, and I thank you for raising it.
Thanks, Alan. And look, just on that one, before we get to a question online, when management tells you they need a new system, there often are short-term fixes, particularly in response to our routine annual general computer controls audits. And our reports every year give case studies about things that could be fixed now and cheaply, and don't need a new system, because that's often the IT team's go-to response. Oh, well, it will cost too much, and it's not a priority. I'm sure it's not a priority for you, but we can't do anything now till we get a new system. And this report too, the Assist report, actually, as Paul said, talks about specific recommendations and what can be done right now to fix those really significant risks.
This is a question from Rob McDonald. Caroline,
Hi, Rob.
Caroline, are there any special issues you recommend audit risk and committee chairs to focus on in the coming year?
Well, look, Rob, other than MOG, and I believe you're still on Treasury, so you'll be getting finance and the procurement framework as well, so that makes sense, and that good luck with those MOG changes. I'm sure Treasury will handle them well. One thing to be aware of, if you haven't already been briefed on this, I'd suggest you seek urgent and comprehensive briefings if your department is affected. Each agency is required to have a MOG, or Public Sector Reform Steering Committee, and there is a central implementation or steering committee run by central agencies, so Public Sector Commissioner acting under Treasurer, now that Michael Barnes has sadly retired, a loss to our state. Make sure you're focused on what those risks are, because they have, I don't want to be making recommendations sort of back to the future, back to where we were in 2018 around payroll and finance systems and those sorts of things. It's just boring. Let's just get it right and move on to more interesting stuff, or make sure the stuff that Sam talked about doesn't happen. As I said, sustainability reporting is Treasury, if you're still part of the pilot that Treasury is doing, and they're giving that feedback, which we contributed to on last year's pilot round. So that's specific to those agencies. The IS, General Computer Control Audit findings, the prior year significant findings or long outstanding significant findings may, if they haven't already triggered a qualification for you, they may do this year if the risks have changed, or we're just sick of talking about it with you. And we'd obviously have to go through the process of explaining the rationale there around why it's so significant. So get on and fix those audit findings as a basic one. But look, we are looking at the changed, really taking account of the operating environment, assessing audit risks in a really targeted way, and making sure we're doing our audit procedures in a really targeted way to make sure that our audits are as efficient as possible. And so, we're just hoping for a smooth audit season, Rob. I'm sure Treasury, as always, will have one of those.
I had a quick question. I didn't plan to ask one, but I will, because audit recommendations were raised. I'm the Mayor of the City of Canning, Patrick Holland. I've been the Chair of the Audit Committee for about half a decade. I'm about to be deposed because
under the new legislation,
elected members are no longer
Yes.
capable of chairing
Yep.
an Audit and Risk Committee. But I did work as a risk manager in state government for many years. In fact, I led the audit recommendation process at the Department of Justice, Health and also at Education. I wanted to ask about the robustness of audit recommendations and the willingness of local government, but also state government departments to actually accept them, first of all, and then actually act on them. At the City of Canning, we've introduced some robust processes, but still have issues where management are often looking for a way to either sidestep politely or to defer taking action on recommendations. And I'm wondering whether the actual management of audit recommendations or recommendations themselves of actually audit recommendations have ever been audited, because we see them getting pushed out way beyond what the original recommendation was supposed to have been. I'm talking about timing, and those timings were put in place for good reason. And I'm just wondering how we kind of make that more robust and tighten that process up.
Yeah, good question, Patrick. And I'm sure you'll find other things to do with your time now that you're not allowed to chair the audit committee. Look, the willingness to accept and address recommendations, as I said, that defensiveness or dismissiveness can be a concern. Overall, public entities in WA are pretty good, state and local government. We don't mind engaging in, respectful, robust discussion about why something may not be a finding, how to make it more practical and impactful, like actually really address and get to the heart of the control gap, because it could be something about wording, and we're all on the same page, or we think we are, but there's a difference between what the auditors initially write and what is interpreted as needing doing, and we don't want to create unnecessary work for people because that's a waste of taxpayer funds. Each year we follow up the financial audit and the information system recommendations. So we do that each year, and that's what those prior year findings are. And if they're significant and even moderate, sort of is getting long in the tooth, that's when we really get concerned that they're not being addressed. As I said, around local government, they have a legislative obligation to report significant findings made by the OAG publicly. That's not the case for FA and financial audit and information system finding audits, findings in the state sector. They just go to management and the minister, and they get consolidated up into those graphs and reports that you see. For performance audits, for the ISAP reviews like Assist, where the recommendations are reported individually and publicly, there is that transparency to everyone, but we don't follow those up the next year. So it's up to the entity, and that's where independent chairs of audit committees or audit committees sort of lifting their both status and game in the state in recent years has helped with that, clearing the backlog and addressing them properly. There's also another mechanism there. The Public Accounts Committee traditionally, bless you, has a mechanism for triaging OAG audit reports and following up findings that are important, calling in entities to provide evidence on how they've gone with addressing those. And this is the previous two Parliament's committees that I have familiarity with, and certainly when we meet with the new Public Accounts Committee of this Parliament, we'll be recommending they do that. But if they don't, if they have other priorities in terms of inquiries and don't do that process, we may decide to do a follow-up audit on important performance audit and other recommendations that aren't followed up routinely in an annual sense. Question online.
This is from Councillor Peter McCleary. This year will see the local government elections, and during the process, the list of electors' addresses are provided to all candidates by the WA Election Commission. Have the management and return of this data ever been audited?
Not to my knowledge in recent times. We did have obviously conscious of what's going on at the moment in the state in light of the state election procedural concerns with voter experience rather than count. But no, this is something that we have raised and considered from a local government perspective before. So if there is any concern there that you'd like to email us and give us more information around the specific concern, depending on who's in the patch and to what extent, because parliamentary committees may also decide to get in that space and we don't want to get under each other's feet. Really welcome any feedback on your particular concern. I think there's the privacy aspect, but Peter, please let us know your concern. I welcome that. As well as any other specific topic suggestions or referrals for performance audits, forensic audits, information system app audits. You're in good seats to refer. You can raise those. They are confidential. We don't tell people necessarily who raises it, particularly if you ask for it to be confidential with them. We definitely won't tell people, but you can do it anonymously or directly. Anything else? Any other questions? Look, the next forum is on in November. Thanks, Paul. And here's an invitation to a webinar. You can, if you're interested in the use of messaging apps in government business, you can put your camera up on the QR code there and you'll get the website link. The Law Society is organising a webinar that's going to be jointly presented by the Information Commissioner, who's here in Albert Facey House, Catherine Fletcher, will be convening it. And there'll be a panel with Elizabeth Tidd, the Information Commissioner, given that these apps are often used for exchanging information, but they can facilitate instant and secure communication, but they present new considerations for record keeping, FOI and privacy. So Liz Tidd, the Federal Information Commissioner, as well as our State Information Commissioner, Simon Froud, the Director General of the National Archives, Professor Anne Toomey, Professor of Constitutional Law at Sydney Uni and a member of Australia's Open Government Forum, and myself will be on a panel answering questions to the best we can and probably raising a few more. And you're warmly welcome to attend that. And now we get to go outside and enjoy some refreshments together and get to know each other a bit more and have any other questions and answers that maybe didn't come out in this session. Once again, Sam, thank you so much for your generous and thoughtful insights from your range of experience and sharing those with us. Thank you everyone for attending both in person and online and for your continued contribution to good public governance in Western Australia.